Have you ever wanted to become a better person? To become popular or strong or liked by your crush? Have you ever been confused about who you are and what you want to do with your life? Well, there is no better anime or media that encapsulates this than Mob Psycho 100. Mob Psycho 100 is an anime based on the manga by One, and while One's art isn't exactly the most beautiful or intricate, his paneling and storytelling is unparalleled. Adapted by Studio Bones, the perfect storytelling of One gets transformed into an anime with some of the most amazing animations eyes have ever seen. Mob Psycho 100 is about Shigeo Kageyama, or more commonly known as Mob among his friends, who is an Esper. An Esper is someone with telekinetic abilities who can exorcise spirits, which are ghosts, I guess is the best way to describe them. However, even amongst Espers, he's still one of the strongest, if not the strongest, and Espers are incredibly varied. You see powers of all kinds. Basically, he's a middle schooler who has a truly insane amount of power that's controlled by his emotions. If his emotions reach 100%, which the anime will tell you with a little percentage counter, they'll explode in pure power, hence the name Mob Psycho 100. Little bit on the nose, don't you think? Yet, what makes him so intriguing isn't how much he can lift with his telekinesis or how many other Espers he can defeat in battle. What makes him intriguing is that even with his powers, to everyone else he's completely normal. As a matter of fact, he's below average, he's incredibly weak. He can barely run without collapsing, or he can't even pass his tests, he struggles with math. At the start of the anime, he isn't in any clubs, nor does he have any friends. While he does have a part-time job, he's basically extorted by his fake exorcist boss, Arataka Reagan, and being paid a measly 300 yen. He has so much power, yet he's terrified of it. Mob is, at his core, he's just a kid. He's a kid who has normal worries. He has a crush and he worries about his future. Mob Psycho 100 is an amazing anime, not because it's about Mob defeating all of his enemies. It's because it's a story about Mob growing up and trying his best to do better. Instead of joining the Telepathy Club, a club that just lounges around and does nothing, he chooses to join the Body Improvement Club, a club with frankly the best show of healthy masculinity I've ever seen. That's a topic for later. He actively tries to better himself, and the Body Improvement Club are happy to help. But the thing is, Mob doesn't only actively try to make himself better, but over the course of the anime, he tries to help others as well. He always believes in the good of others, no matter what they have done. At the start of Season 1, you see Mob. He seems emotionless or emotionally distanced from everyone. He injured his brother years ago when his power erupted into a new, more destructive state called question mark percentage. He's terrified of his abilities, and he suppresses them along with his emotions, which are the trigger. This is also when he first meets Dimple. Dimple is an interesting character. He's a malevolent spirit who Mob meets when infiltrating a cult focused around laughter. Mob doesn't laugh with simple provocation like jokes, or nor does he laugh with the special mask imbued with psychic energy that Dimple gives him. Instead, he just stays placid and emotionless. Dimple is furious and tries to make Mob laugh, and in a bout of rage, he tells Mob to get a clue. While this line seems simple, to Mob, this line resonates deeply. He is unable to get a clue. He has trouble understanding basic social cues, and he often takes things literally. Reaching this conclusion, it causes him to break, and he reaches 100% rage. The fight afterwards is unimportant. It's a flashy display of Mob's strength animated beautifully, but it's also a display of Mob's insecurities. He wants to get a clue. He's aware that he struggles with social cues and emotions and people. At this stage, he's struggling with grappling with all of his emotions. Later in Season 1, you see Mob try to improve himself. When the Telepathy Club loses a member, they ask Mob desperately to join on, as unless they reach the 5-person minimum, they'll be disbanded and lose the club room and budget they'll be using for snacks. At first, Mob contemplates it. He calls Reagan his boss, and he's heavily dissuaded. Still, Mob decides to think it over. After a big psychic battle with some spirit haunting a girls' school, the next day, just as the club asks him once more if he would like to join, the vice president of the student council bursts in with the Body Improvement Club, the club that is to take over both the budget and the room. The vice president asks Mob what he really wants to do with his youth. Mob thinks about it, and the scene flashes back to when he first meets his crush, Tsubomi. His goal has always been to win her affections. Since childhood, after Tsubomi became bored with the little tricks he could do with his telekinesis, he realized that psychic powers did not make him special. He needed to improve. In a turn of events, instead of joining the Telepathy Club, a plot point that had been built up all episode, he chooses to join the Body Improvement Club in an effort to improve themselves. However, even with all the effort that Mob puts into changing himself, change doesn't happen overnight. As a matter of fact, it can unravel incredibly easily. Later in the season, Mob fights the exact opposite of himself, Teruki Hanazawa. Todoroki is someone who has strong psychic abilities, however, he believes that these powers make him superior and he has no qualms flaunting it to his advantage. He's popular, he has girls hanging off him. However, he sees Mob, someone with so much power, he refuses to use it and sees him as an enemy, as a rival. Todoroki's furious, he demands that Mob fights him. But Mob sticks to his morals, he's just type of guy, he refuses, and even while being attacked, he refuses to use his power in any way but defensively. In some cases, the defensive barriers do lead to some physical attacks, but never by intention. Mob refuses to use his powers to hurt someone. He cannot let a repeat of what happened to his little brother happen to anyone else. His resolve does not break, even upon being choked. Unfortunately, he passes out, and that's a trigger for question mark percentage to come out instead. Question mark percentage is the very reason he suppresses his emotions. It's ruthless, it harms anyone in its vicinity. It's disgusting to him. To Mob, it's horrifying. Question mark percentage decimates Todoroki and the school they were fighting in, leaving Todoroki naked and floating in the sky. It's an epic fight, but the audience can't feel good about it. Mob wins the fight, but he loses against the goal he was trying so hard to maintain. When Mob comes back to his senses, he is filled with an unbearable sadness. And the audience is too, because Mob did it again. He hurt someone with his powers. All of his change became undone. His sadness radiates into pure power, a beautiful show of 100% sadness. As he cries, the squirrel builds himself with his powers. But his change can't rebuild. It's unraveled. His tears carry the grief of the fact that he wasn't able to change. That even through all of his efforts, he still hurt someone. However, while for Mob this was a show that he was weak, to Todoroki it shook his entire worldview. Todoroki is one of the best examples that in Mob's efforts to change, he changes the people around him. Because of the fight, Todoroki starts thinking. He thinks that he isn't the greatest, because in front of him is someone that's infinitely more powerful, and yet he's not willing to use his powers at all. He's completely humble. Mob is someone that's trying to better himself. Because someone so strong is trying to better himself, Todoroki realizes that he needs to change as well. He needs to try better himself. This change in Todoroki is something that's shown amongst many of the characters Mob meets, especially Reigen. Reigen is an interesting character, even more so than Dimple, if not he's one of the most intriguing characters. Reigen is Mob's master. He lies about being an exorcist and he runs an exorcism agency, but when actual spirits appear, he calls Mob to deal with it. Despite being a fraud, Mob listens to Reigen and trusts him with his whole heart. He hangs on every one of Reigen's words. Reigen was the first person to tell Mob that his powers didn't make him different or better than anyone else. As a matter of fact, Reigen compared to having psychic powers to having great muscles or having strong body odor. Interesting comparisons. It's a trait that Mob happens to have. It doesn't make him any more special. Reigen, of course, at the time didn't realize just how deeply these words imprinted themselves onto Mob. Mob really cares about that. He really believes that he can get better even with these powers of his. Reigen, of course, he doesn't remember it. The first time Reigen realizes that he has to change is when he and Mob have a falling out. Mob is telling him about the changes he's experienced, having friends, and that he has plans now, and Reigen just dismisses them. He doesn't see the way that Mob has been changing, and that causes Mob to stop coming to work. Reigen initially brushes it off, albeit being quite hurt, and tries to rebuild his business from the ground up. He started off by himself, there's no reason he can't do it again, right? Well, he is at first. He grows his business, he joins talk shows, he becomes famous. This all comes crumbling down remarkably quickly when a group of psychics invite him onto the show and expose him. Reigen's done for. He's ruined. He drinks his worries away at a bar, which doesn't require many drinks. And after puking at the back of that very same bar, he realizes that he was the one that hadn't changed. Mob wasn't relying on him, he was relying on Mob. With that realization, he accepts an interview about, his downfall. Instead of fighting the allegations or saying anything as his defense, he thinks back to Mob and acknowledges that, in fact, Reigen had been the one using Mob completely. He addresses Mob directly in that interview, saying, "You have grown up." The episode ends with Mob saying, "I've always known that my master's a genuinely good person." This is one of the most beautiful scenes of reconciliation because it's not a big apology, it's the fact that Reigen is finally acknowledging that Mob is changing and that he's growing up. Instead of having the big apology that the audience accepts, this is the best way to show that Reigen is also changing because of Mob. Reigen is learning new things about how his student is growing up now, and that he has to change to fit along with him. All of these characters and what they've changed and how Mob has changed builds into the last season, Mob Psycho 100 Season 3, released in October 2022. Mob has changed. The anime starts with a montage of him doing things he couldn't do in season 1. He can run longer distances without passing out. His grades are improving. A little something like he can return a soccer ball now. This seems trivial, but the callback to the first season really shows how Mob's efforts haven't been in vain, no matter how big or how small. Mob goes to school again, and life is normal. It's deceptively normal. Until he finds out Tsubomi is going to move away. His crush of so many years is going to move away to another city. Therefore, after all of his growth, he steals his resolve to confess his love to her before she moves away. He buys flowers, he psychs himself up, and he gets hit by a car saving a child. That's so classic of Mob. But instead of, passing away, he's the protagonist. That can't happen. Question mark percentage comes out in an effort to save him. Question mark percentage is ruthless. It rampages across the city, causing endless destruction, desperate to meet Tsubomi. And for the first time, we don't see what, but who it is. It's Mob. To be more precise, it's Shigeo. It's the emotions Mob has been suppressing. It's the part of Mob that he's been hiding away. And with each moment, as he rampages across that city, he argues with Mob. He steals more and more of Mob's being. He is furious that Mob separated them. They should have been whole. This inner turmoil leads to Mob always being completely consumed by Shigeo. This is until Dimple appears? He's appeared because of the enormous amount of psychic energy that Mob had brought. It brought him back. He appears in the possessed body of Reagan, who had been fighting desperately to make Mob hear him. He'd been fighting through all the harm, all the destruction, all of the rubble. He had been fighting through all of this just to tell Mob his darkest secret. He's a fraud. He's a liar. He's never been a psychic, and he's been using Mob. Mob comes back at his words, that everyone has two sides, and he returns. He comes back. He brings all of his being. But instead of being just Mob now, he's completely whole now. He has Shigeo, he has his emotions. He can experience them. He confesses to Tsubomi, but he gets turned down. But that's alright. He's different now. He's stronger. He's no longer scared. He doesn't really have one goal anymore. It's not to confess to his crush and hopefully go on a date with her. He has aspirations. He wants to go to high school. He wants to get into a good high school. He has friends to hang out with. He's not just one person anymore. He's Mob. The final season of Mob Psycho 100 ends with Mob laughing cheerfully at Reagan's birthday, something that he wasn't able to do back in season 1 with Dimple. This is the beauty of Mob's character development. He's a character that shows that everyone deserves to get a chance, and if one really wants to change, they can. He's strong, not because of his psychic abilities. He's strong because he wanted to change, and he did. He fought with every ounce of his might to become a better person, and he did. Mob's fights were never really against the other Esperts. They were always with himself, fighting to control his own powers, to make the audience think, can he hold back this time? Will he reach his goal? He fought to become better, and with that final scene with him laughing is proof. Mob has changed, and anyone can.